Welcome to the Royal Geographical Society with the Institute of British Geographers. My name is Alistair MacLeod and I'm the Head of Collections here at the Society. And today we're standing in the Society's famous Ondaatje Theatre, where so many people have spoken about their travel and exploration over the last 100 years. We're delighted to be working alongside Silversea sales and marketing teams to promote Silversea journeys to Antarctica using the Society's collections and their interpretation for Silversea guests as part of our exclusive partnership arrangement. The Society is synonymous with the history of Antarctic exploration, and as part of our exclusive arrangements with Silversea Expedition Cruises, we're delighted to be able to share some of the content from our rich collection of charts, maps, photographs and artifacts which trace this incredible story. Little was known about the great continent that was posited to exist to the south. The Terra Australis Incognita, this great unknown Southland, was first theorised by Aristotle, who believed that the northern hemisphere lands of the world must be balanced by the same equivalent to the south. The theory was developed by Claudius Ptolemy, the geographer working in 2nd century Alexandria at the Library of Alexandria, and he began to map with very little information what he thought might be the land to the south. It wasn't really until the beginning of the 17th century where in China a map was created called the Map of the 10,000 Lands for an Italian Jesuit missionary, Matthias Ricci, and this began to give evidence that there was something below South America and below the lands of Australia, which were even then only beginning to be mapped and charted. And it wasn't until the time of Captain Cook on his second circumnavigation of the Earth when he was sent by the British Admiralty to find the southern lands. Cook used his huge skills as a navigator and decided not to travel further south than 71 degrees. He knew that he could continue the journey, but he decided that the risks associated with the ice that he found around the ship would be too much for a ship of its time. And of course, the great age of polar exploration in the Antarctic began and was led by the Society at the very beginning of the 19th century. And one of the key figures associated with that enormous legacy of science and exploration is Sir Ernest Shackleton. And this year we celebrate the centenary of the famous trans-Antarctic expedition led by Shackleton on board the ship the Endurance. And as part of our relationship with Silversea, we will be providing Silversea guests with detailed information about Shackleton's career as a polar explorer, but also sharing some of the fabulous images that were taken during the Endurance expedition by the Australian photographer Frank Hurley. Some of the very first images to bring to us a sense of the great scale and enormity of the Antarctic landscape. We hope that you will enjoy using these resources on board ship, and for those of you who are able to travel to London, we hope that you will come and see the exhibition, The Enduring Eye, the Antarctic legacy of Sir Ernest Shackleton and Frank Hurley, in which many of these photographs will be showcased. At the core of the Society's Antarctic collections lie the materials which document the heroic age of exploration at the beginning of the 19th century. And we hope that guests with Silversea will find added benefit in reading some of these early accounts, looking at some of the images that were captured by these men travelling on the first expeditions, which will in turn enhance your own experiences on board ship. The Society's collections are stored and accessed via the foil reading room. We're now going to go downstairs to have a look at some of these iconic items relating to the history of Antarctic exploration. Welcome to the Society's foil reading room, which is the portal to access all of the Society's collections, and I have with me today some of the key Antarctic items relating to Shackleton. Shackleton's role in the Antarctic really began on the first expedition that was funded by the Society, the Discovery expedition. And the Discovery was a purpose-built ship, a scientific vessel created for the expedition under the aegis of the Society, the Royal Society and the British government. As a result of that expedition, on which Shackleton served as the third officer, he became aware of the grandeur and beauty of the Antarctic, but he also had a yearning to return following that expedition to take his own expedition, and that was the Nimrod expedition. Shackleton was one of the very first proto-modern explorers. Unlike Scott, he wasn't funded in total by the British government or in fact by the Society, and had to learn to live by his wits to raise the funds that he needed. And one example of an item that we have here is the Burberry balaclava helmet that was worn by Shackleton on the Nimrod expedition. As you can see, it's been through quite a lot of use. All of these male explorers on the heroic age of exploration had to be prepared to carry out running repairs on their clothing when they were on the expedition. So you can see all of the stitching which has been carried out by Shackleton to mend this balaclava. Made by Burberry, it was part of the clothing ranges that they created, which would ultimately end up being developed into the clothing worn by military officers in the First World War. Shackleton has written a message on the Burberry helmet, which he presented to somebody called Frank Thornton, who was a theatrical impresario. And Thornton gave Shackleton lots of advice on how best to promote the outputs from his expeditions to the public in Britain. The Nimrod expedition was a very successful one for Shackleton in that he reached the then furthest point south, and the Royal Geographical Society awarded him this medal, which we have here at the Society today, for his efforts. However, it also demonstrated Shackleton's enormous skills as a leader of men. In reaching the point south, he could very easily have continued the journey to reach the South Pole, but instead turned back, knowing that although he might have reached it alive, he and his companions would almost certainly have died before they could return to safety. And as a comment on that expedition, Shackleton said, "It's better to be a live donkey than a dead lion." The expedition set out in 1914 as the shadows of war gradually began to gather over Europe. And in fact, before departing, Shackleton had sent a telegram to the War Office suggesting that he and his men and their ship, the Endurance, could be made available immediately for war service. The expedition had been very carefully planned by Shackleton, and here we have a menu from an annual dinner which was held in 1914, which was really a fundraising opportunity for Shackleton. Sitting next to another guest at the dinner, he was asked towards the end of the evening what was his next great plan. Shackleton drew a diagram of his planned expedition, the Imperial Transantarctic Expedition, in which he planned to cross the Antarctic continent, the first man to do so. Shackleton viewed this as being the next and perhaps the last great opportunity for exploration in Antarctica, as Roald Amundsen had beaten Scott to the pole. As soon as the Endurance reached the Southern Ocean and then finally the Weddell Sea, the ice conditions became much more severe than he'd anticipated, and by the early spring of 1915, the Endurance was locked in the ice in the Weddell Sea. The currents and flow of ice around the Weddell Sea were so very destructive that by the autumn of that year, Shackleton knew that the ship itself was going to be broken by the ice. Moving on to the core of the exhibition here at the Society this autumn. The exhibition is focused very much on the photography of Frank Hurley, the Australian photographer who was selected by Shackleton to document the expedition in film and in stills photography. Hurley throughout the expedition had taken photographs of the men working and also looking at the grandeur of the Antarctic landscape, and you can see those in this wonderful album that was presented to the Society by Frank Hurley on his safe return from the Antarctic. This model demonstrates the ship in its final stages of destruction before it sank beneath the ice on the 21st of November 1915, which is the exact date that we will use to commemorate the centenary by opening the exhibition here in London. As the ship sank beneath the ice, Shackleton and Hurley dove back onto the ship to collect as many of the glass plate negatives that had been created by Hurley in the lead up to this point in the expedition. Shackleton saw the great value of these images in recording the achievements of the men to date, and he sat with Hurley discarding images which they considered to be less of value than others, and ultimately they collected about 128 images. Those 128 glass plates were then carried by the men on the onward journey to rescue. They reached Elephant Island with the men before Shackleton set off in the James Caird to cross the Southern Ocean to reach South Georgia and ultimate rescue. From the point of destruction of the ship, Shackleton had confirmed that each man could carry 8 pounds in weight of personal possessions. And of course the glass plates made up a huge part of the weight that Hurley was prepared to carry. Shackleton himself had been given a copy of the Bible by Queen Alexandra to carry on board the expedition, and because of its weight he discarded it onto the ice, thinking he had perhaps far better things to carry for the onward journey. And this was in fact picked up from the ice by able seaman MacLeod, who then took it, seeing its value, and then returned it to the Shackleton family after the expedition and the safe rescue had been completed. So the core of the exhibition here in London will be the extraordinary set of 68 glass plates which the Society owns and which it has held in its collections since the 1930s. Our exhibition will fully digitise all of these plates, bringing out much of the detail which appears in the background, in landscapes, and in some of the intimate photographs that were taken by Hurley on board the Endurance in the wardroom, which was nicknamed by the men the Ritz. The Society's Antarctic collections are very broad, and we will be presenting showcases and displays and enrichment resources for guests of Silversea, both on board ship, on the Silver Explorer, but also here at our base in London, and then around the UK and internationally. And we hope that you will be able to enjoy seeing these items and that they will inspire your own journeys to the Antarctic continent.